Hi everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel, and if you're watching this it means I have got into paediatrics specialty training. If you're new here, then hi, my name is Jasmine and I'm currently working as an F3 doctor in the UK, which means that I have completed my foundation years, so F1 and F2, and I'm now taking a year out of training this year essentially. If you're seeing this video, then it means that I am entering into paediatric specialty training this year, but right now as I'm filming this, I am currently only a few days on from my interview and I have no idea if I'm going to get in this year or not. But basically I am going travelling in a few weeks, so I thought I want to sit down and film this video today while the application process and the interview process is still fresh in my mind. So if I do get in, then that means I've done something right and I can hopefully share all of this with you guys. I guess it's kind of manifesting that I'm going to get in because I've just got all my camera equipment set up, I've just prepared what I want to say for this video, and yeah, that will all be a waste of time if I don't get in. So fingers crossed, if you're seeing this video, it means I have got in. It also means that I have got my first choice deanery because I have only ranked one specific area that I want to be in, because despite how much I do really want to get into training this year, it is important to me that I am in a particular area so I can stay living with my fiance, my dog, and nearby to our families. So yeah, unless I've had a big change of heart after filming this video, then I have got my first choice deanery. So I'm going to break this video down into a couple of parts. First of all, the shortlisting process, which consists of white space questions, and essentially that is the scoring criteria that gets you to interview. And then secondly, more about the interview, what the different stations are and how to prepare. Just a disclaimer, the experiences I'm talking about are my own experiences, and of course I don't have any inside knowledge into the application process or scoring systems. I'm also obviously not able to share exactly what I've put in my own application or able to share kind of stations or questions I got in my own interview. Everything I'll be sharing is kind of either a generic overview of my own experiences or what's already widely available on the RCPCH website. Starting off with the shortlisting criteria, which is very available over on the RCPCH website. Just to note as well, as I'm filming this, it is currently 2026, so the application cycle that started in 2025. Just to make sure you are double checking the criteria if you're watching this in the future, as it has been known to frequently change year on year, and this year was a little bit different to last year. For this year, there were 60 points total between two assessors, meaning 30 points for each assessor. There were 5 different categories for the white space questions. First of all being transferable clinical capabilities, which was out of 8 points. Personal achievements and reflections, which is also out of 8 points, and these two are kind of the heavier weighting sections of the application. Audit and QI, which is out of 5 points. Academic achievements and research, which is out of 4, with one of those points being for extra postgraduate degrees. And finally, teaching, which is out of 5. Each of these sections asks for a different number of examples, and each question is also split into 2 parts, which should become clear as we go through. So each half of each example in each section, I guess there's a lot of parts to it, has a word limit of 50. So I did initially feel that that actually wasn't a lot of words, but when you think about it, because each question requires a lot of examples and they're all in 2 parts, it does actually add up to being quite a lot of words, so it does end up being quite a lot of writing, which also can take a fair amount of time. So because of this, I would recommend starting early. I think I started properly sitting down and starting to put things on a Word document a couple of months before the application even opened, and my initial bullet pointed ideas did end up being quite different to what I actually submitted with my application. So yeah, because of this, one of my overall tips would be to start early. Just make sure you're giving yourself plenty of time. It's definitely not something that you want to rush. Starting off with transferable clinical capabilities. My advice for this question, as with all the different sections, is to really read exactly what it is you're being asked for each white space question, and although you've got a small word limit, making sure you are directly answering that question and not going off on a tangent. And also to read the criteria for the top scoring bracket, as I would advise that that is what you're aiming for on all of the sections, especially if you're watching this video perhaps a little bit in advance and starting to think of how to build your portfolio. Because of how competitive getting into training has got, to the best of your ability, I would aim for that top scoring bracket. So I have just got my laptop to the side of me just to read the more specific things out. If I can, I'll kind of pop this up on the screen as well. So for this section, first of all is description of a capability with explanation of relevance to paediatrics. Again, noting the two parts to that question. So not only asking about the capability, but how it's relevant to paediatrics, and also a description of how this has prepared you for a career in paediatrics. This year, at the bottom of this document, which is on the website, there's also a glossary kind of thing, which I actually found really helpful because it specifies a bit more exactly what they're looking for in this section. So for clinical capabilities, they give examples such as teamwork, handover, communication, and clinical procedures. Of course, you can go beyond this and use different examples, but maybe guided by these. And also, just to note, for the clinical procedures, they do state to have a maximum of 2 of these within your examples. So clinical procedures being things like cannulation, inserting an NG tube, for example. I actually put my clinical procedures into just one example and touched upon a few different things that I did. I kind of had one as the main focus, but then did also mention some other skills. I wanted to kind of narrow this down to just one example to have enough space in the other examples to talk about different things. So you can do it however you wish, but just don't go over 2 examples with your kind of hands-on procedural skills. My approach to starting off the section was initially bullet pointing capabilities I felt like I had that are relevant to paediatrics. And I guess as the question is asking, think about really how that has prepared you for a career in paediatrics. So I know sometimes it can be difficult to think ahead, particularly if you're still in foundation years when you're writing this, but really try and think about how that capability that you're talking about could be useful in paediatrics and then how you're going to carry that forward. Another point to mention is nowhere in the guidance does it specify that these examples have to be paediatric specific, and I actually think it's beneficial to have examples outside of paediatrics even if you do have a lot of experience in the specialty. I think it just helps show that you're well-rounded, have transferable skills, and yeah, that you can just adapt from other experiences to make you good for this specialty. I used a couple of paediatric examples, but I also used examples from GP. I think it can be quite nice to touch on primary care and how that can link into paediatrics, and also used examples from my adult medicine and adult ICU rotations. This section asks for 5 examples, each with 2 lots of 50 words. So that's already totaling up to 500 words, which again you can see is building up, which is just another reminder to make sure you're starting early. I believe the next section was new for my application cycle, and that is personal achievements and reflection. Again, it's split into 2 parts, so I'm just going to bring up the application here. First of all, description of the achievements and explanation of relevance to paediatric application, and a reflection on how this demonstrates your suitability for a career in paediatrics. I remember initially thinking this question was quite generic and not really knowing where to start or what it is that they were after. But as I got into the swing of writing it, I did quite like this section because I think it gives you a chance to show things that you might not have otherwise been able to include in your application, and just to show that you're well-rounded and try and make yourself stand out. Again, the glossary section here is quite useful. So the glossary specifically says that the examples can be medical or non-medical, they can be personal or team-based, and can include things like community intervention or charity work. It also specifically highlights the importance of reflecting on that achievement. So whether that's how it has impacted you and contributed to your own personal development, or how that's impacted others, can be a way to reflect that. And again, it does say that in the glossary. So just building onto some of those ideas of kind of what to include, examples here can be things like exams. I feel, again, this is completely just my own opinion, but exams is one that I put into this section. So I'd completed my first couple of MRC PCH, so the first 2 paediatric specialty exams, which I included in the section, but I put it in a way that's not just saying, you know, I've done the exam so I'm suited for paediatrics, but trying to really reflect on what it is that I'd gained from preparing for these exams, doing the exams, and how that's actually making me more suitable and more prepared for a career in paediatrics. So just trying to give that extra layer of actually reflecting on that achievement a bit more. Also, different things to include can be different courses or perhaps different roles that you've had throughout your F1, F2 years or in your hospital trust. So it is quite generic, but it gives you the opportunity to talk about things that you might not get the chance to put in other parts of your application. Just make sure all of the examples are different from each other and are relevant to paediatrics, even if they're outside of the specialty or outside of medicine altogether, just linking back to why that would make you good for the specialty. The next section is audit and QI, and I do think the next few sections are a bit more self-explanatory and a bit more objective, which in a way does make them easier to prepare for. I think the important thing to note in the next few sections is exactly where it is you're getting points, and making sure that if you have done those things, you're making it really clear that you are hitting those marking criteria. So for example, in this one, for maximum points, you need evidence of having planned and coordinated a quality improvement project and presented at a regional, national or international meeting. Again, paying attention to where you need to have presented to get the maximum points, as I think in the next section that's a little bit different. As well as description of results and recommendations. So to get the max points, you do need to hit all of those 3 areas and make that clear in your white space questions. Again, the 2 questions themselves here are quite self-explanatory. So firstly, describing your role and be specific. Say exactly what you did in helping design and lead this project. Did you come up with the idea for the project? And if so, was that inspired by anything in particular? Did you lead the PDSA cycles? Did you implement the change ideas yourself? And if so, what were they? So just be specific. I think it does say in the glossary as well that using generic terms such as I designed and led a project is not enough, and they want to specifically know what you've done, so just pay attention to that. So I do just want to give a bit more advice on audit, QI and these kind of opportunities, as although I know I'm focusing on how to write about them and how to put them in the application, of course you need to have these things first to be able to put in the application. And I know that can be tricky as well, especially if you're maybe watching this a little bit in advance. You might be wondering how to go about getting these things. At the time I graduated and started F1, I actually felt quite daunted by the idea of audit and QI and about research, which I'll talk a bit more about in the next section. And I just hadn't really ever become familiar with it, and to be honest, it just felt a little bit out of my reach. I'd say my biggest piece of advice is just go for it and really look for opportunities and get involved in anything you can. And by that I mean asking around in departments soon after you've started F1 if you're graduating, or even if you're in medical school you can start doing this. So I mean asking consultants, asking your supervisors, asking around in departments if there's any projects that are going on that you can get involved with, or also if you're in a specialty that you're particularly interested in, you can always come up with your own idea for projects as well and kind of propose that to consultants or whoever's kind of in charge of those things in your department. Ask them, you know, I've noticed this area could perhaps need some improvement, could I do a project, an audit or QI on this? And most of the time the answer is going to be yes, and that is you designing and taking a lead on the project. Another piece of advice is to be brave when shooting your shot and applying for things like presentations, conferences, and even publications. Again, initially before I had experience with it, that is something I felt was out of my depth. I kind of doubted myself on the projects that I'd done, thinking, you know, is this good enough to be presented at an international conference or a poster presentation or that kind of thing. But essentially what I started doing after finishing a project was first do a bit of a search of what's available and like what further opportunities I could get from this. So for example, wanting to present at conferences, you often have to do this quite in advance because there's normally a deadline to submit an abstract, which comes a lot before the actual conference itself. And search quite widely as well. So one of my project examples was neonatal sepsis. So I searched for neonatology conferences, I searched for any conferences including sepsis or infectious diseases, and I also came across some conferences that kind of just accept general QI projects from junior doctors. So any of these could be relevant, just making sure you're kind of meeting their criteria and noting, like, to present at certain conferences they require you to have not presented anywhere else, so just pay attention to that kind of thing. As well as being in person, a lot of conferences, including national and international conferences, might have the opportunity to present online. One barrier I did find to some of these things was unfortunately the cost. Some of them can be quite expensive. Unfortunately, I don't have the power to resolve that problem, but I would advise, if you're either a student or F1, F2, just looking at things like your study budget and whether you can either get discount because you're an F1, F2, or whether you can get any funding from your trust to be able to pay these fees and kind of attend the conferences. Same for publications. I initially also felt this was way out of my reach, but have recently got my first publication. So my advice for this would be to search for journals and have an idea of what it is you're wanting to get published. So all things like QI and audit, research, but also things like case reports can get published. So once you've got an idea of what you're aiming for, then you can look at specific criteria for a specific journal. For example, thinking about their word count, the formatting that they want, and what kind of things they're looking for. A lot of consultants do have experience with publications as well, so it can be really helpful just to reach out to them and see if they'll supervise you with the project or can help you out in any other way. So that was a bit rambly, but the moral of the story is just go for it. Everyone starts somewhere, and everyone was once at a point where they weren't familiar with how to get involved in these things, and often one opportunity can lead to another, and you may end up really enjoying it in the end. So yeah, just pushing yourself and see kind of where you can get to with these opportunities, not only for portfolio and point scoring, but also just for yourself and your own kind of career development and growth. The next section is research and academic achievements, which I believe has less weighting than it did previously, but still an important section. To achieve maximum points here, you need to have research or an academic achievement with either a national or international presentation or a publication as first or last author. And you also get an additional points for having certain postgraduate qualifications which are listed in the guidance, which I personally didn't have, but that postgraduate qualification now has less weighting than it did previously, so if you don't have it, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Again, so the white space questions, they ask about the achievement itself, and then the nature of your project or academic work, your role and what your role involved. I did struggle feeling there was a little bit of overlap with these questions, but my advice here would just be to make sure you're directly answering the question, but try not to repeat yourself exactly, because you do only have a limited number of words, and if you're kind of duplicating things, then you are kind of wasting your word count on other things you could say. Just really try and get across exactly what it is that your project was and what it was trying to achieve. Research can be something that is tricky to get into, and I did personally struggle with this, as I did my foundation years in a district general hospital, where generally less research does happen compared to tertiary hospitals or those more closely linked with universities. Firstly, if you're watching this as a student, I mean, first thing, well done for watching this so in advance, but also I would recommend looking into your research opportunities as a student. Whether or not I would have said this a few years ago, like the advice I got when I was in uni is like, don't worry about it yet, just enjoy your university years and look at these things later. But now with specialty training becoming more competitive, I would say that if you can get involved in research in university, I would say to try and go for it. But also, if you feel you've got too much on your plate and you want to focus on your exams and just kind of getting through university, that is also completely okay. Just if you have the capacity and the opportunities are there, then perhaps think about it. But also, if you are an F1 or F2, it is still accessible. Again, it's just about asking the right people, asking around in different departments, who the research lead is, and trying to get in contact with them. There is always something happening, but sometimes you just need to go a little bit more out of your way to be able to get involved. And just to note, for both the audit and QI and the research sections, they do ask for 2 examples, however only the best example is marked. So absolutely try and make both examples as best you can, but if you feel like you've only got one example that's ticking all the boxes, then don't worry, because having one good example is as good as having 2 good examples, if that makes sense. And the final section is on education and teaching, which again is broken down into 2 parts. So first of all, describing your example of the teaching session and programme, and describing your involvement with any evaluation and subsequent modifications that you've carried out. So essentially here, you're wanting to have designed, delivered and led some form of teaching, and also have obtained feedback and reflected on that feedback to be able to improve your teaching. Examples here could include things like a teaching series that you've designed yourself, whether that's in person or online. Other examples you could use, again just from my opinion, things like simulation or bedside teaching if you've been involved in. And from my experience, I think most hospitals have somewhat of a teaching or undergraduate department. So if you haven't yet been able to get involved in those things, just trying to contact the right people and seeing if they can either advise you where to go or if they can kind of support you delivering your own teaching series. In terms of feedback, I'd always advise trying to get written feedback, more for your own genuine reflection on it, and I think it's quite a helpful way to be able to store feedback on your teaching. I personally quite like using Microsoft Forms to get my feedback and use like an online QR code generator just to make that quite accessible for people. It just allows people to kind of use free text to say exactly what they thought about the teaching, and you can also get some cool statistics on average ratings on your teaching. And I got information like pre-teaching and post-teaching, like confidence levels, so you can actually see if there's been an improvement. Okay, so I think I spoke a bit longer than I anticipated to on that shortlisting section. So I guess in summary, if you're thinking about wanting to build your portfolio, the things I would generally advise are keeping somewhat of an anonymous record of your reflections of clinical experiences and clinical capabilities, getting involved in courses, so things like leadership courses, life support courses, and taking opportunities for perhaps different leadership roles throughout F1 and F2. Like we've mentioned, getting involved in audit, QI, and research as much as you can, and having the confidence, if you've done a project that you feel like is meaningful, submitting it for presentation, for publication, and just seeing what comes out of that. So I know it's a lot, but honestly, coming from someone who graduated medical school, not really having much under my portfolio belt, and getting most of this throughout F1 and F2, I can assure you that the opportunities are out there, and if I can do it, you can do it too. Moving on to the interview. So I think I had about 3 weeks to prepare for the interview between finding out and the actual date, which I did feel was enough. I think I took two or 3 days of annual leave just to kind of have the time to fully focus on preparing and going through clinical scenarios and through a few of the examples that we'll talk through. So resources wise, the main resource I used to prepare for my interview was genuinely the guidance on the RCPCH website and making up a lot of my own questions based on this. I do know people who have used other resources like textbooks or websites, but a lot of them were kind of expensive, and I didn't feel like I needed those because of how much the guidance kind of guided me. Again, just to make sure you're up to date, my interview was at the beginning of 2026, so make sure if you're watching this in future years that you're looking at the right guidance. So for this year, we were told there would be 4 stations, each 10 minutes long. So in no particular order, I think they do come in random orders. There is communication, which is with a role play actor. Career motivation, so this is your typical showing why you're suitable for the specialty, why do you want to do the specialty, those kind of things. Reflective practice, where they ask you about a specific example, which I'll talk about a bit more. And paediatric clinical reasoning, so that's you're working through your clinical scenario. Starting off with communication, again, I'm just looking over to the guidance at the side. You are told that it's a station with a role player, and it's assessing your ability to interact with patients, parents, or carers. So it doesn't specifically say if the interaction could be with a child or with a parent. It says the scenario will be an explanation of a clinical condition or reasons for an intervention or transfer. So that is what's given in the advice. And it also says you get 5 minutes to read the scenario and prepare before you go into it, which at least for this year is the only station where you get time to prepare. I do think this station was one I felt more nervous for, as although the guidance is relatively clear, I felt it's the one that was most unpredictable. But my advice for preparation here would be really using what that guidance says and thinking of all possible examples that you could get from that. I'm sure a lot of you, if not all of you watching this video, are familiar with OSCEs, and the way I actually prepared for the station most was how I prepared for OSCEs. So I did practice with family and friends, both medical and non-medical, giving them scenarios and just practicing having those communication stations with them. I think what's important to remember is the skills that they are assessing in the communication station are skills that we use every day as a doctor. So just try and get into the mindset that it's a real life scenario and you're dealing with it how you would with a real patient. Moving on to career motivation, so this is a station that you can prepare for a lot more. Again, going back to the guidance, so information that they give, you'll be asked to demonstrate your commitment to a career in paediatrics, demonstrate an understanding of the specialty, and demonstrate how your personal attributes and career so far will help make a good paediatrician. It says to prepare your portfolio in advance, so kind of prepare the types of things that you want to talk about, to help demonstrate your enthusiasm, suitability, and motivation for paediatrics. So essentially how I prepared for this station was kind of bullet pointing ideas, both of reasons I think I am suitable for paediatrics, so skills that I have, capabilities that I've shown, and also things that I've done to demonstrate my commitment to paediatrics. Kind of points you've prepared for can be adaptable to different variants of those questions. At the end of the day, you know why you want to do paediatrics, and although there's going to be inevitable overlap between people's reasons, whether they're more generic or more personal to you, just really taking a moment to really reflect on why you want to do paediatrics and what you think you could bring to the specialty. Okay, sorry if the lighting and my voice has changed a little bit. My camera just died and my throat is struggling, but I'm going to push through these last two sections and hopefully it can cover everything. So next station is reflective practice, which is also a station you can very much prepare for based on what they give you. You are asked to reflect on a significant clinical event where something has either gone well or not well and reflect upon it to demonstrate how this has modified your practice and how you have disseminated your learning. You do get 10 minutes for this question, as with all of the stations, so it is quite a lot of talking about one event. I use the guidance to break down and structure my answer a little bit, so did go in quite prepared. First of all, explaining what happened. You want them to be able to kind of imagine the situation, but also I wouldn't spend too much time explaining what happened. Where I assume the marks come from is the actual reflection, so making sure they're understanding what's gone on but not spending too long on that. The main bit is the reflection, so really how parts of that event made you feel, and then the next parts of the question, so thinking about how it's modified your practice, so if you have changed things moving forward in your work because of that event, and also how you've disseminated your learning, so if you've kind of passed that on to other people, perhaps you've done a project or something to help improve this in your department, just thinking about what you've learnt but also how you've spread that learning as well. And finally is your clinical reasoning station. So this is where you've got 10 minutes to work through a clinical scenario. Again, the guidance gives quite a lot, so it does say it will be a paediatric scenario, but that they're not expecting you to have complex paediatric knowledge, and that it's set to a level that a UK F2 doctor or equivalent should be able to answer. So the way I kind of approached preparing for this was to think about what kind of scenarios could come up. So things that happen in children but don't particularly need specialist paediatric knowledge. So in my mind, I thought about conditions that can overlap with adult medicine. I made sure I was familiar with national guidelines and managing these things in children, and used just some resources I found online and Resource Council in particular for those kind of flow charts with the good guidance on. A lot of it is things I have come across in day-to-day practice anyway, and most likely it will be things you'll be familiar with as well. It's just having that practice to make sure it's all in your mind to be able to say in an interview setting. I think a big thing to remember in this station is senior escalation and making sure you're showing that you're a safe doctor. Just think about realistically, if you were in that scenario in real life, are you going to want to have support around you? And in most cases with anything, serious, acute, you're going to want support there. Again, just practice. Make a list of scenarios you feel are possibilities to come up. Practice some scenarios you think might not come up, but just to practice how you're going to approach the situation if something throws you off a little bit. Again, thinking about what would I do in real life? Who would I want to be here? How would I interact with the child and the parent? What would I do in my initial assessment and management to make sure I am a safe doctor? So yeah, resources, kind of national guidelines, NICE guidelines, Resource Council, and just practice essentially. So as you might be able to hear, my throat is struggling a bit, so I'm going to bring this video to a close. I really hope you found something useful from it. I know a lot of what I was saying was talking through the guidance, and I don't necessarily have recommendations of other resources to use, because genuinely that is what I used in both the initial application and when preparing for my interview. I hope that just talking through it has given you a bit of a better idea of both building your portfolio and putting things into your application and preparing for the interview. I hope the ending didn't seem too rushed. If there are any bits you feel I've missed out, I'm more than happy for anyone to either comment or DM me and I can add anything further on. So yeah, I really hope that filming this video has not been a waste of time, as I do think I'll probably only post it if I get into training. If you're watching this, it means that things have gone to plan, and I really hope the things that I'm saying and that I've done can then go on to help you as well. If you've made it to the end of this video, then thank you so much for watching, and if you do have your paediatric application or interview coming up, then I'm keeping everything crossed for you, and best of luck.